What are Chevy 63s? How much do they cost to swap them into your rig? And how difficult are they to install? Find out the answer to all these questions later in the video. Brought to you in part by Alpine Toyota. If you're looking for a great way to lift the rear end of your Toyota, Chevy 63s are a solid solution. They offer great articulation, a 2 to 4 inch lift depending on your configuration, increased comfort, and they're usually pretty cheap. You can find a set of these leaf springs under any GMC or Chevy half-ton pickup from like 1988 all the way to 2014. Stock Toyota leaf springs, at least in my 3rd generation pickup, are 52 inches long, but they go as short as 48 inches in earlier generation pickups. So you will be gaining a total of 11 to 15 inches in the rear leaves. And with longer leaves, you get more travel in the leaf springs, which then gains more total travel of your rear axle. And in theory, these leaves should be way more durable than stock, because if you think about it, you're taking leaves that are essentially from a full-size half-ton truck and putting them into your like quarter-ton Toyota. So of course, they should be able to handle a bit more abuse. I went from Old Man Emu 2.5 inch-ish lift leaves in the rear of my truck to these 63s. And let me tell you, the ride quality difference is night and day. The longer leaf springs just give you so much more comfort riding on and off road. But because these packs are longer, they're obviously not a bolt-on solution. You'll have to either purchase a mounting kit or get crafty and build your own. And then they get welded up to your frame. Now, it's not crazy difficult. Anyone who is good with a tape measure and has a decent welder and can weld decently can handle this job. Especially if you've already done a solid axle swap on your truck, this is easy by comparison. And not all 63 swap kits that are available are the same. For example, I use the Rough Stuff Specialties Ideal 63 Chevy Spring Swap Kit. And this kit is unique because it actually gets Frenched up into your frame rail. And if you don't know what Frenching is, it is essentially moving the mount up into your frame rail. And this requires actually cutting out a small section of your frame and welding the new mount tucked up into the frame. And the benefit to this is when your mount is higher in the frame, the leaf spring gets mounted higher, translating to a lower amount of total lift, which is what I was after. But this also has another benefit of giving you a ramp that rocks or logs and stuff can kind of slide over onto your leaf springs instead of getting hung up on the big bulky bracket hanging below your frame. But Frenching is totally optional, and there's a lot of other kits on the market that don't require cutting out that little section of your frame. My kit was actually provided to me by Rough Stuff Specialties. Thanks, Rough Stuff. And I gotta say, the quality is fantastic. Everything is super beef. And the kit just came with everything that I needed to swap the 63s into my truck. And I've helped do the 63 swap on other trucks using different branded kits. And I gotta say, Rough Stuff nailed it. The kit is awesome. Chevy 63s are by far the most bang for the buck lift you could do in the back of your Toyota pickup. So let's get into cost. At the time of recording, Rough Stuff has the kit that I used listed on their website for $293.33. And it includes the Frenched hangers, rear shackle hangers and shackles, bushings, axle perches, which in my specific case, I didn't end up using. It also includes the U-bolt flip plate and U-bolts with all the necessary hardware. And once you got the kit, you're just left finding the leaf spring. Because these leaf springs were mass produced for so many years, they can usually be found pretty easily and pretty cheap. I paid $100 for my specific set, but these can easily be found from like $50 up to $150 at junkyards or like Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that. So for a grand total of less than $500, that's a pretty solid upgrade to the rear of your wheeler. Now, let's get on to the installation. So first thing we did is we used a plumb bob, held it up against the frame, had it dangling straight down to the center of the axle, then marked that location on the frame so that we knew exactly where the axle needed to be landing with the new leaf springs in place. And then we use the exact same process on the front hanger. You want to use a plumb bob and you want to find exactly where the leaf spring bolts in factory in that little eyelet. You want to mark that up above it on the frame so that when you cut that bracket away, you still know right where that leaf spring used to land. And then it's time for disassembly. Remove your axle and take out your old leaf spring. And with all that removed, it's time to take out the grinder and cut off both the front and rear mounts. And before you're ready to start putting up the new mounts, you need to take your old leaf springs and put them next to the 63s, because now it's time to get some measurements. So the first measurement we're gonna need is the distance between the center pin and the center of the eyelet. So for example purposes only, we're gonna call this 31.5 inches. And then take the exact same measurement from the center pin to the eyelet on your stock Toyota leaf spring. And we'll call this one 20.75 inches for example purposes only. So you take the 31.5 you got from the 63, then you subtract the 20.75 that you got from the Toyota leaf, and that'll leave us with a measurement of about 10 3/4. And because this measurement was done with the spring completely unloaded, we need to add a 1/4 inch to make up for the fact that when it's in the truck under load, it will flatten out that bit, landing us at a theoretical 11 inches. And that 11-inch number is the distance that you need to move the new front hanger from the factory location. So using that plumb bob mark you made earlier to mark the old front eyelet, you use that to measure the 11 inches back. Now using the plumb bob mark we made earlier to where the leaf spring used to mount, we'll take that mark and then measure 11 inches back on the frame. This is where we're going to mark up the new 63 hanger. And at this point, we just clamp the hanger under the frame into position based off that 11-inch mark. Then we put the leaf spring into the hanger just temporarily, swung it back, and then we used the plumb bob again. We held it up against the axle center mark we made on the frame and made sure that it was lined up with the center pin that is on the 63. And with that center confirmed, it's time to weld that hanger in place. Well, unless you're Frenching it like I am. Now the process to actually French it up into the frame was also pretty straightforward. I took the measurements of the box that makes up this hanger and then moved those measurements up onto the frame, and then made sure to measure at least 18 times so that I was absolutely confident that I'm putting the hanger up where it needs to be before I made the cut. And once it was cut out, we tacked up the hanger into its location and then hung the leaf spring one more time and checked all the measurements, making sure we were completely happy with where it laid before we ended up burning it completely into place. And that was the most difficult part of this swap. The rest is fairly easy. Now with the leaf springs mounted in the now fully welded front hanger, we bolted up the axle, but this was just hand tight for now. And then we assembled the shackles. We had them bolted to the back of the leaf spring, put the bushings in the rear hanger, and had everything bolted together. And from there, we clamped the rear hanger to the frame with the leaf springs attached. And then we dropped it down, letting the whole weight of the truck set in on the new leaf spring. And by putting the weight on it, we could see what the shackle angle was like. And we had to adjust it a couple of times, moving the hanger forward or back until we got the desired shackle angle that we were going for. So the rear hangers are now mocked up into place and ready to be tacked in. And then it was just a matter of taking out the tape measure, making sure that the location of that rear hanger was identical to what it was on the other side. And then with the final location figured out, we tacked them into place and then removed the clamps, put the weight back on the truck, and then checked our measurements just one more time. And then we're ready to burn everything together. And bam, that's essentially done. We painted everything and then reassembled it. And right here is the final result. So I'm thinking I might go park my truck on that snowbank right there and test the new flex. Well, due to a lack of traction, that was a lot harder than I was expecting it to be, but I got it in a position where you can kind of see what the flex is now like. On this side, you can see the wheel gap is significantly larger, and if we head to this side of the truck that's actually up on the bank, that tire is nice and tucked up in that wheel well. By the way, guys, all the measurements and stuff in this video where I mentioned was for example purposes only. That's because I don't want you to take these measurements and apply them to your own truck. I want you to take the measurements yourself and make sure they're gonna work. The measurements that I mentioned in this video aren't even the measurements I used on my truck. Those measurements came from the low range off-road 63 kit instructions, and they didn't apply to this truck, I guess. There's so many different wheelbases and different lengths of leaves that were used in these old Toyota pickups, so make sure you measure. Don't just use the measurements that I mentioned in this video that was purely for example. Anyways, guys, that about wraps up this week's episode of Dirt Garage. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could do me a huge favor, smash that thumbs up button, that would be awesome. And hey, consider subscribing. I upload weekly Toyota building, wheeling, and off-roading content. Anyways, I'll see you next week. Peace.